We're still about 5 minutes away from our scheduled departure, but I do want to make sure that everyone knows what we're doing here and that you're all on the right boat. This is the big trip. This trip takes about 2.5 hours. This is the one that made Circle Line famous. We have been circumnavigating Manhattan Island for about 77 years. I say this though because we have a much shorter trip that leaves at 10:30. It's a Liberty sailing that only takes about an hour. If that's the one you wanted, you may have gotten on the wrong line. You've got 5 minutes to get off and go to the other boat. Otherwise, you're coming with us for 2.5 hours all the way around Manhattan Island. And what we do on this trip is we sail south downtown. So we're going to be going anti-clockwise. We're going to back out into that Hudson River behind us. We're going to go downtown. When we get out to the harbor, we will keep sailing up to the Statue of Liberty. We'll purchase tickets and they're on the pier. We're going to wait for them. We are not like one of the ferry companies with a tight schedule. We're not going to pull the gangplank on people running down with tickets. So it'll be a few minutes. Is a New York City water taxi. It's a ferry boat. And the one next to it, the crazy looking green boat, that's a speedboat. Circle Line's owned and operated Beast speedboat. They do like half hours. This is the Hudson Yards area, and this is $20 million of development here. Not totally complete. You can still see some construction going on there. Hudson Yards gets its name because it was built on top of the rail yards for Penn Station. So underneath this whole development, this whole neighborhood, are the trains that come into Penn Station. In front of the black glass structure has the silver siding. That's the Jacob Javits Convention Center. That is our city's largest convention center, our nation's largest single-space center. That's all one room inside Javits. Other cities, they've got bigger centers, but they've got more land to spread out on. And here in Manhattan, we can't spread out. We only move up. We are an island, and New York County, that's Manhattan's official name, only about 13 miles long. Second smallest county in America by land size. In the center of Hudson Yards, a very interesting looking structure called the Vessel. Sort of looks like a honeycomb or a beehive. Designed by Thomas Heffernan, it is 154 interconnected staircases. When it first opened up in 2019, very popular with photographers that would go up there and take pictures of the surroundings. Since has been closed indefinitely for safety concerns. So now you can only take pictures of the vessel, not from the vessel, at least for the time being. As we pass by, you'll get a very nice picture of Empire peeking out, as I said, in between the other brand new skyscrapers and sort of above the vessel there. All parkland pretty much all along the west side here, the Hudson River Park. Next to us at Pier 84, in front of Pier 83, the bike pad, are these big blue piers, the Chelsea Pier. Inside there, you will find bowling alley, batting field, tennis court, and Olympic park. But that's not where we're going. Most of them went out west to other points in America. And when they did, 100% of the time, ferry boat leaving to take the New York Circle. In fact, there was a U.S. Supreme Court decision that took that into account. In the 1990s, New York and New Jersey actually had a legal view and an unobstructed view as well. And that torch in her right hand, of course, represents freedom. Always has. In her stone too. When we get by, you can see it's sort of notched at the top like a keystone. And on that stone tablet, inscribed in Roman numerals, July 4th, 1776. The famous newspaper man, these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. What they would not have missed, for some of them the biggest thing they had ever seen, was what Emma Lazarus called the New Colossus. Liberty enlightening the world. 305 feet to the torch. She stands 151 feet above her pedestal. She has a 36-foot waist and 8-foot long index finger. We've done the math. Her shoe size would be an 879. And you know, she was about a tenth of an inch thick. So she was the color of like a shiny new penny. But she's turned green, oxidized out here in this sea air. There was some talk for her centennial of restoring that copper finish. New Yorkers completely rejected that idea. They hated it. Green is her signature color now. But coming up off our right bow now is a 200-acre island in the middle of New York Harbor that many New Yorkers do not realize exists. Part of the reason for that is because it was a military base for over 200 years. The U.S. Army was here from the beginning of the country through World War II. Then for about 50 years, the U.S. Coast Guard was stationed here. Today, it is owned and operated by others. You can do that on Governor's Island. You can glamp here. And I'm not making fun of it. It's very popular. There are more tents than there were. One of the breaks like someone just pulled up with their own tent. When the British and Dutch governors literally kept their residences here because it was a strategic location. There was a fort on Penrose Island, which today is Liberty, on Ellis Island, on top of the ferry there, American flag and city flag. That boat, that's a big boat, holds 10 times as many people as we do. But you know, they don't have a tour guide. They don't spin around off the statues. They don't get any ideas. You're better here. When you pass the ferry, look between the Coast Guard building and the ferry terminals. There's a little red brick church, white steeple, gold cross on top of it. It's only a couple of stories tall, and it may seem like a small thing for me to point out on a city of a tour of such big things in this city. That's why I like to point it out. That church was built in 1790, and when it was just about the tallest thing on all of Manhattan. What's more remarkable is that it remained so for almost 90 years, until we began the construction of the big bridge up ahead. The first one we're going to sail under is the world-famous Brooklyn Bridge. Now, the Brooklyn Bridge, famous by name, but we've almost allowed ourselves to forget why it is so famous. This bridge was completed in 1883, 3 years before even the statue. And when it was completed, it was simply bigger, taller, longer than anyone thought possible. It was a huge leap forward in engineering, and New Yorkers were frankly stunned by it. You wouldn't have seen, when we were constructing this bridge, these tall skyscraper buildings. You wouldn't have seen helicopters, that's for sure, like the one getting ready to take off here on the east side heliport. What you would have seen in Brooklyn Heights on the right, was becoming the first of many commuter suburbs of New York. And that's because Robert Fulton was docking one of the first steam-powered ferries over here. That was a new invention. All along the Manhattan shore, you would have seen very tall sailing ships. And the sailors on those ships would have referred to the top mast of their ship as the skyscraper. That term was nautical slang in the 19th century that only began to be applied to tall buildings when we started making them taller than the sailing ships. New Yorkers started to say these two buildings are taller than skyscrapers. They meant taller than the sailing ships. And that didn't happen until after the Brooklyn Bridge, because the Brooklyn Bridge was the first ever use of intertwined steel cables, which of course these are the cables we use on all suspension bridges today. These are also what we use in elevators today, and elevators make skyscraper buildings a lot more practical. So the bridge up ahead seems to fit in now. We've got a couple bridges of the same size right behind it. But the truth is that this city grew up to match the scope and scale of the bridge, not the other way around. When it was first opened up, it towered above New York City. Up ahead on the left there's still one tall sort of skyscraper sailing ship. That's now at the South Street Seaport. You can see the three tall masts there at Pier 16. The waiver tree is open every day to the public as part of the museum. Beyond that, you'll see Pier 17 has a big stage on top of it. It's a summer concert series for the past couple of years. They use the bridge as sort of a beautiful backdrop. And these concerts, big artists as well. And as you look at the bridge up ahead behind it, either side, look at those steel cables. They do create a beautiful sort of spider webbing intertwined design, but that's because there's two sets of cables on the Brooklyn Bridge. The original cables are slanted, diagonal, and the other ones, the vertical cables, they were added years later after the invention of the automobile. This Brooklyn Bridge was built before we had cars, and it was built with horse and buggy in mind, which is sort of lucky for us because, you know, one of the best free things you can do in New York City is take a walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. And when you do, you are on that original pathway. You are elevated above the cars. You don't notice them below you. You've got beautiful city views, river views, but really a view of the bridge itself. You know, behind Pier 17, I'd just like to point out a residential building spiraling facade. It's about 70 stories tall. That's New York by Gehry, and that is named and marketed with the name of the famous architect, Frank Gehry. Same man who did that billowing sails design in Chelsea. This is his residential offering in New York. Behind it, green top, Gothic-style cathedral-looking building. That's the Woolworth Building. It was the tallest in the world in 1912. Today, it's almost hard to point out on this tour. 900 feet tall, but it's going to disappear from our view very quickly. But a very famous building of its day. On the right, the neighborhood over here certainly anticipates people coming over the bridge. There's a very famous restaurant underneath the bridge called the River Cafe. It's on a barge that sits under the bridge. The food is good, but really you're paying for the view over at the River Cafe. On the other side of the bridge, you'll see encased in glass is a carousel. It's Jane's Carousel. It was built in Youngstown, Ohio in 1921. It was rebuilt here in 2010. It is open to the public as part of the park. Behind it, these old warehouse and factory-looking buildings, these have all been converted to luxury-style loft apartments. So, hardwood floors, wide open spaces, tall ceilings, million-dollar homes. Beautiful views out the large windows, easy access to New York City. Like Soho and Tribeca before it, it is a once industrial neighborhood, gone residential, and given this abbreviated real estate name. This is Dumbo Brooklyn on the right. D-U-M-B-O. And that stands for Down Under the Manhattan Bridge Overpass. So the nicknames are getting more complex as we go forward.
Oh, yeah.
On the right, there's a functioning electrical power plant there, and there's a big body of water ahead of it. You can see the opening to it. That's the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And you know, the Navy left in 1960. They built many World War II ships there back in the day, so it still has that name. Today, when we pass by, what you'll probably see in there is fast commuter ferries. That's what we've got going on there. We've got film studios over there, a large amount of old warehouses that are now film studios. Because, you know, the largest collection of styles of old and new existing side by side in Brooklyn in the Midwest. On the left, there's over here. This construction project is big, expensive, and really controversial. That Conch was the New York City mayor of the 1980s. It is also sometimes called the 59th Street Bridge. Not an official name, but it is sort of a bridge with three names. The Queensboro and Conch 59th Street Bridge. Popularized in the Simon and Garfunkel song, 59th Street Bridge. And you know, if you remember reading The Great Gatsby, the first style, it really has been since the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s and 30s. Of course, we all know, you know, the jazz musicians that came out of the Harlem Renaissance. That really is those jazz musicians who give us one of the more enduring nicknames for New York. New York, the Big Apple. And that goes back to the Harlem jazz musicians who used a slang that sort of related sugar to money. You know, you still get sugar mommy and sugar daddy. And back in the day, they would say things like, you know, if you have a gig in Atlanta, well, that's sure a peach. But to make the big sugar, the big money, you gotta go to the Big Apple. You gotta go to New York. Of course, the Renaissance of Harlem was not just about music. There was a lot of great writers that came out of there as well, including probably most famously Langston Hughes. And he had a book that was published in 1951 called Montage of a Dream Determined. Very influential. From that, and he started to hit what we call home runs. Not only did he hit more than anyone else, he was hitting. At the time, the Yankees were playing in Manhattan, and he was sharing the field that was owned by the New York Giants. Off the bridge. So we've got one of the best captains in New York Harbor. He comes up here, he knows what he's doing. As far as the cement fan, he doesn't know baseball. He knows about the Broadway bridge where it's an angle to the side where it doesn't sit as low. That's the apple. I believe in him. When I get there, I close my eyes. You can close your eyes. I think the captain closes his eyes. It's fine. No, you experienced boaters, you know you can look at the water line on the wall and see how far we are from high tide. But then when you look up at the bridge, you can imagine how close it would be if it was high tide. Once we get through, the neighborhood on the right is called Marble Hill. And it is called Marble Hill Manhattan. That's because this lot was blasted out to make navigation more easy to develop. It used to go around Marble Hill, and that was filled in with land and so forth. They practice here on the river. Their boathouse is right here. They wait for us and they jump off the rock. And that's true. They've been doing that since 1950 over here. It's 90 feet at the top, but they usually work their way up through their stage here. This was popularized in 90 with Joe DiCaprio, which is in a movie called The Basketball Diaries. And it's a story about Jim Carroll, the writer who wrote here, and he used to be up the platform that road. Sailed under 14 meters into the Toronto River. This one. One more up ahead that slings over Nora is a railroad bridge that is normally closed to the Amtrak train. We call it N. They open the bridge for us. This bridge, steel bridge in front of us, was built in 1900 and opens to this day about 1,000 times a year. I would estimate 900 of those times per circle like this. Most of the time it's just crossed by the train. Before 1900, there was still a train bridge here, but it was a wood bridge. When it was a wood bridge, get through the railroad bridge, we are back on the Hudson River. We are at the northern end of Manhattan. We're going to make a left. We're going to start our return trip to Midtown. As we do, some really stunning views that I find a lot of airline passengers are surprised by. All of that is New Jersey over there, the Palisades of New Jersey. Out in the distance, by the way, it's very clear, that's the Mario Cuomo Bridge. That's the new bridge that was built out there a couple years ago. On the left, this part of Manhattan is really like the last part that is original, undeveloped. But if you can imagine when Henry Hudson first sailed here, this is what he saw on the whole island, on both sides of the river. Rolling European medieval monasteries that the Rockefellers bought and reassembled here as part of Fort Tryon Park, well, in Fort Tryon Park, as part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So you can go to Fort Tryon and you can walk through medieval Europe in uptown Manhattan, out in the harbor past the statue. On the Manhattan side over here, underneath the bridge, you'll see a little red lighthouse. And this is the central focus, the hero on a children's book called The Little Red Lighthouse, and this lighthouse navigating boats out here. And then one day the bridge is being built next to it. The lighthouse is concerned. When the bridge is done, they put a little red light on top of the bridge, and the lighthouse says, "No need for me." The lighthouse feels me. But the point of the book is to teach small children that the small things are still valuable. And so of course the bridge is light, and the bridge explains to the lighthouse that it's still needed. The book ends happy, but in real life, a couple years after that book was published, they were going to take the lighthouse down. Children were not happy. They started a letter writing campaign. If you were getting hundreds of letters from children, you would change your mind too. So the lighthouse has been landmarked, and the book ends by saying, "It's real, see for yourself." And to this day, children still come to visit the Little Red Lighthouse. Still talking about the bridge, if you look over at really the size, the height of it, it's a very tall bridge. And, you're on the Hudson River. So this is the river where the Miracle on the Hudson happened. And if you saw the movie about that, Sully, with Tom Hanks, a Clint Eastwood directed movie, there was a scene that really showed that plane coming over this bridge. That plane did come over the bridge by less than 1,000 feet, which in aviation is a very close call. So I feel like most people have heard of the Miracle on the Hudson, but if you haven't, it was January of 2009. U.S. Airways Flight 1549 was going from North Carolina to Seattle, flew into a flock of geese and lost both engines. The captain, pilot Sullenberg, was an experienced glider pilot in the past, and he thought his best option was to land on this river, that he wasn't going to make it to the airport. He could see that it was not a windy day, so this water is very rippled today, but that day it was flat, like glass. He brought the plane down over the bridge by less than 1,000 feet, and then it touched down much further ahead. And I will try to point down to that spot when we get there. So it's all the way up, or all the way downtown rather, where the deep water piers are. And it touches down on this river and begins to slide south. The vessel that you're on, the Circle Line Manhattan, was one of the first vessels on the scene. It was two of those fast commuter ferries from the Waterway Company and the Circle Line Manhattan out there. Now, if you saw the movie, we're not in it. Clint Eastwood, for some reason, decided he didn't want the big green hull of a Circle Line boat next to the plane. But Captain Weber and his crew were out there. I was home watching on TV like everyone else. But the crew told me that it was very accurately depicted. And they said that in a short time, everyone was standing on the wings of the plane as if waiting for a bus. So some were very calm and some were not. But either way, they all, stood still and followed instructions well. And the boat you're on was used as sort of a coordination platform for the NYFD and the U.S. Coast Guard while they got the people off and onto the smaller ferry vessels. In the Civil War, and then he went on to be president of the United States. And at the end of his life, he had started to financial trouble. That's true, and even for presidents that had, some toxic schemes and things like that, they made bad choices. But he was then, they had back to he was and he was diagnosed with cancer. And he began to worry about his life's future. Now, throughout this time, he was frequently fields to write his memoir that he rejected the idea. But eventually, with his financial concerns, he agreed to a publishing deal. And he told his friend about it, Sam Clemens. Well, Sam Clemens is pretending so they could see and know you had a fire protocol. The government assumes you have a fire system in New York. So the newer buildings have water tanks. They are covered up architecturally. All these buildings you see here with the tanks on top of them are therefore what in real estate terms we call a pre-war building. Sturdy construction, open passageways between doors. So these are all pre-war buildings in the Upper West Side. Of New York City. And we see all these apartments. There are a lot of residences here. The population of Manhattan is 1.6 million. The population of the city is more than 5 million. This is, of course, not an easy number to get because many folks, they might not want to answer a sentence. They may be undocumented. They may be living in a rent-controlled apartment. So they do say that the actual number may be higher. But it's 1.6 million on Manhattan. And they also say that those are just the people living here. The number of people that come onto the island every day is somewhere from 5 to 6 million. I feel like they all take my train about the Yankees and how wonderful they are. Like, let's go. See these skyscrapers again in the distance that we talked about before, Times Square, the two adjacent pole antennas. British Airways Concorde jet, that's part of the museum. That's the fastest jet to ever fly commercially. It set the commercial speed record between New York and London in 2 hours and 52 minutes. You can see there's stairs. You can go up inside the Concorde jet. You can tour the Growler, the submarine up at the front of the pier, the once nuclear-armed submarine. And the carrier itself is the most heavily damaged ship to survive World War II. It went on to see action in Korea and Vietnam as well, and then finished up its career as a recovery ship for NASA. And inside that gray housing on the upper deck stern is the Enterprise, a space shuttle. And you can tour that over there as well. We are going to be docking where we left from on the 42nd Street side. So we're passing Pier 86, Pier 84, and we're gonna dock on the 42nd Street side of Pier 83. Now folks, when we get past our Circle Line Pier here and we start to come in, I have a safety request. Maybe I shouldn't call it a request. We have safety instructions. Most of you are already sitting in a chair. That's the best thing to do. But more importantly, we would like you to stay out of the stairs as we approach the pier. If you're upstairs, stay up the stairs again. It'll be like 2 minutes. But we do ask that you don't go out to the bow until the crew opens the doors for you. Okay, because they'll know when it's safe to